My name is Catherine Crace. I'm a lawyer, social worker, and expert on the reporting of suspected child abuse and neglect. This video is part of a project called Making the Tough Call. In this video, I'd like to explore the question, should reports to Child Protective Services be required of certain individuals? I bet for most people seeing this video, the answer would be a resounding yes, or even of course. However, I'd like everyone to stop before jumping to conclusions about what's good or right or best, and really sit with this question. We live in a world where many professionals, including doctors, nurses, teachers, social workers, psychologists, etc., they've been required to report suspicions of child maltreatment for longer than most of these people have been alive. But professionals weren't always required to report suspicions of child maltreatment. And there were good reasons why the policy of mandated reporting was adopted 50 years ago, but arguably, the system that we have today might not be the best way to protect children from harm. You might not know, but it wasn't until the 1960s that there was significant enough concern in society for protecting children from abuse that the policy of mandated reporting was even suggested. The first mandated reporting laws were based on the belief that if society could require professionals who have substantial contact with children and families to make reports of suspected child abuse to the government, then the government could step in and protect children before they are irreversibly harmed. By 1967, all 50 states and the District of Columbia passed legislation that required doctors and other medical personnel to report suspected child maltreatment. Within 5 years after passing mandated reporting laws in my home state of New York, child fatalities from child abuse dropped by 50%. Mandated reporting laws seemed to be working, and so these laws were quickly expanded across the country. But original mandated reporting laws were limited in scope. For instance, these original laws only required doctors and other medical personnel to report their suspicions. But then the list of who are mandated reporters has grown over time. So, for instance, in all states, teachers, social workers, police officers, psychologists, and many other professionals have been added to the list of mandated reporters. And in 18 different states, plus the District of Columbia, all adults are mandated reporters, even when they're not a particular professional. The first mandated reporting laws back in the 1960s were limited in scope and were really focused on protecting children from physical abuse and not other forms of maltreatment like neglect or emotional abuse. And there was a good reason for this. The original mandated reporter framers were focused on responding to child physical abuse and not neglect. Physical abuse often has visible evidence like broken bones or bruises. Neglect is much more difficult to determine. The definition of neglect is often tied to subjective adjectives like adequate, sufficient, or appropriate. These terms mean different things to different people. The original framers of mandated reporting laws conscientiously avoided requiring reports of neglect to be made. Many experts in the field of child maltreatment at the time didn't want to require reports of child neglect because they feared over-reporting of unnecessary reports. They were concerned that reports of neglect would overwhelm the early child protective services system, making it harder for physical and sexual abuse cases to be identified and responded to. They feared that most reports of neglect would be unsubstantiated after investigation, and they feared that over-reporting of neglect would result in disproportionate reporting of poor families and families of color. And the framers had reason to be concerned. More than 60% of reports made to CPS solely involve allegations of neglect, and more than 70% of those reports are substantiated after investigation. The number of poor families and Black and brown families that are reported to CPS without a subsequent investigation finding evidence that they are in need of intervention of protection is staggering. More than 50% of Black children's parents in the United States will be investigated by CPS at some point in time. But 3/4 of those investigations will not find evidence of abuse or neglect. So, is the current system really a problem? I'd argue yes. Mandated reporters themselves admit that they make reports to protect themselves from liability, even when they know that a report will likely not help a child or a family. Parents, especially in low-income communities and communities of color, admit that they avoid telling doctors, teachers, social workers when they're struggling and or need help because they're afraid the professional will make a report to CPS that will only make things worse. We need to rethink our system. We want a system that protects children from harm. We want a system that supports families. After 50 years of mandated reporting policies, it's time to take a deeper look at the negative impacts of our current system and come up with better ways to address the problems caused by the well-meaning system designed more than a generation ago. For instance, we can redefine mandated reporters as mandated supporters. Instead of requiring reports to Child Protective Services, especially in cases of concerns for neglect, we can train professionals to provide the support families and children need to avoid harm. We can change the laws to permit reports of neglect instead of requiring such reports. We can do better, and we must do better. For more information, check out our website at www.makingthetoughcall.info.